Our next story is a spellbindingly sinister one about Gypsy Rose Blanchard, who was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment for the murder of her mother. Her story is one of drama and deceit and an overdrawn struggle for a freedom. This is not only a story of a crime, but also of how a victim can become a symbol for survival and transformation. She was paroled after 8 years, given the sensational elements of her life. Gypsy Rose had made its way to becoming one of the justice system's most discussed symbols as the story has continued to circulate, with millions of people across the world have interest in it. Her childhood story and her manipulations were in widespread controversy among society and inspired documentaries and studies. Gypsy was born in Louisiana, USA, on July 27, 1991. Her mother, D.D. Blanchard, was a complicated woman who devoted herself to her daughter, but was later discovered to have had a mental disorder that included a tendency to manipulate through her child's supposed illnesses. Gypsy's father, Rod Blanchard, was a young man when she was born and left the family soon after. Rod worked in the oil industry and attempted to be there for his daughter from afar, but Dee rallied to have him isolated from Gypsy, cutting off communication. However, January 1993 would be the opening chapter in a story of love, care, manipulation, and control tangled with one another. Beginning in her early childhood, her mother, D.D. Blanchard, convinced everyone who interacted with her that her daughter had many serious illnesses: leukemia, muscular dystrophy, epilepsy, and other woes. D.D. told people Gypsy was mentally challenged and made her use a wheelchair, even though she could walk. D.D. arranged scores of medical appointments and requested procedures, including surgeries, that were unnecessary. Gypsy was on multiple medications which had side effects that made her condition worse. And Dee not only scrupulously falsified medical records to persuade doctors that her daughter wasn't well, she also sought help from charities like the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Early on, Gypsy became accustomed to a life in which her body and her will were fully controlled by her mother. But beneath this care was a grim truth. Dee had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a rare mental illness in which a caregiver intentionally sickens or fakes illnesses in their dependent. All of this is done for attention, sympathy, and admiration from others. In Dee's case, it showed up as a desperate need to be seen as a heroic mother in pursuit of the life of her terminally ill child. Munchausen syndrome by proxy often remains undetected for years because the manipulator is a master of creating the illusion of care. Gypsy was one victim of this deception, having her normal life stolen, her freedom replaced by constant control, surgical procedures, and lies from which she could not escape. In 2005, after losing their home in Louisiana to Hurricane Katrina, Dee and Gypsy temporarily took up residence in a rental house in the southwestern Missouri city of Aurora. During their time there, Gypsy was also 2007 Child of the Year for the Oli Foundation, an organization that aids people who need feeding tubes, according to her mother. Even though she was widely known, Gypsy knew she did not need a feeding tube and also had the ability to walk on her own, but kept up her act out of fear of her mother. In 2008, Habitat for Humanity constructed a small house for them in Springfield, Mo, outfitted with a wheelchair ramp and a hydrotherapy bath. This story, about a single mother with a disabled daughter allegedly escaping the aftermath of a hurricane, drew local media outlets' attention. The local community often came to Dee's aid, viewing her as a selfless mother who gave her life to her ill child. Residents were inspired by her determination to make Gypsy experience all the things she should and needed to, no matter how challenging life became. Dee used this support to further strengthen the image of a perfect family, constantly engaging with local charities and media. The fall in Springfield really connected with the family, and they received tons of resources, support, and love from the community. But the truth is that all of this only strengthened the manipulation that was working behind the tracks. Dee kept the myth of Gypsy's illnesses going, shaving her head regularly to simulate effects of chemotherapy, and saying that medication was causing Gypsy's hair loss. Gypsy used wigs or hats to hide her baldness. Dee usually held her daughter's hand in public, showing false care, when in fact Gypsy was under a great deal of pressure. If Gypsy accidentally spoke in a way that betrayed her mother's narrative, Dee would squeeze her hand so hard that it hurt and later reprimand or even hit her by herself. Gypsy faced an internal conflict. While she considered this behavior pretty normal because it had always been part of her life, she was also realizing how much of her freedom had been compromised. The constant battle manifested into their relationship, But fear of Dee Dee always triumphed, leading Gypsy to go along in order to not be punished. Those were years of greater awareness for Gypsy. Scared of Dee Dee, she was also starting to see that her life was founded on deception. Gypsy observed how her mother emotionally controlled not just her but people in general, whereas her mother got sympathy and help from people, charities, and many others. But her emotional and physical reliance on Dee Dee seemed insurmountable. Things started to change when Gypsy got access to the internet. In this secret window to the world, she would communicate with various people, searching for someone who could relate to her experiences. Through this, she encountered Nicholas Godejohn, a young man struggling with mental health issues, including autism and an aggressive streak. Nicholas was often isolated and misunderstood, drawing him closer to Gypsy. He struck her as the only person who could share her dreams of freedom and make sense of her pain. It did not take long for them to become involved romantically, as they both longed for escape from their troubled lives. This was not only a source of support for Gypsy, but also a kind of catalyst, one that inspired her to think about escaping her life, although if in a particularly radical fashion. Yet Gypsy was caught in a struggle with herself. She was afraid of her mother as well as a wish to free herself from her grasp. Slowly but surely, she came to see her relationship with Nicholas as a source of encouragement and the possibility for change. Nicholas heard her stories of struggle and offered to help. He actually felt sorry for her. To Gypsy, their conversations were a glimpse into a new world, one in which she had a shot at a better life. His response reassured her with the certainty that they together could face anything. To Gypsy, this relationship represented more than just romance. It was her potential ticket away from the prison that had been everything she had ever known. This bond would be the genesis of an audacious plan that, despite some risk and the tragedy behind it, would change her life and her family's life forever. On June 10, 2015, Nicholas Godejohn eased back into Springfield while Dee Dee and Gypsy were at a doctor's appointment. After they returned home and Dee Dee fell asleep, Nicholas entered the house. Gypsy opened the door and gave him a knife, duct tape, and gloves. She was aware these items were to kill her mother. Paralyzed with anxiety, Gypsy went into the bathroom and plugged her ears to drown out Dee Dee's screams. Nicholas, displaying mind-blowing brutality and apparently spurred by the emotional chaos in his life, stabbed Dee Dee 17 times in the back as she slept. It wasn't just the plan he and Gypsy had made together, but his own demons powerless to silence. On one hand, every stab pierced years of manipulation endured by Gypsy and suffering, but made a permanent scar on her life and forever changed their fates. It was the moment Gypsy had waited for, the culmination of years of abuse and manipulation she had suffered. She felt conflicted, horror at what was happening, but relief that her torment might finally come to an end. Despite her actions being part of a premeditated plan, Gypsy was still heavily impacted by fear and her reliance on others, leading her to take such extreme steps. After killing her, they had sex in Gypsy's room and then took $4,400 in cash that Dee Dee had stored in the house. They were not in a great state of mind and fled to a motel out of Springfield for a couple days, talking about what to do next and trying to decompress after the traumatic experience. Nicholas and Gypsy proceeded with caution, even though their inexperience showed in everything they did. Surveillance video recorded them visiting a half-dozen stores where they bought food and water, trying not to attract notice. Gypsy, who was now walking unaided for the first time, sported a blonde wig that made her nearly unrecognizable to the people she used to know. Despite the tension, the couple sometimes seemed relaxed, feeling they had escaped justice. Nothing about them made waves with the motel residents, who thought they were just any couple in love. Gypsy and Nicholas made an effort to remain low-key, and their apparent indifference only cemented this view. The neighbors had no way of knowing that they had just shared a home for a half hour with the same criminals who moments earlier had committed a horrific murder. They sent the knife and other evidence to Nicholas's address in Wisconsin, taking care to pack them to hide any traces of blood. As a leak or suspicion in transit was out of the question, the knife was wrapped in cloth, then in a plastic bag, and finally put in a cardboard box, so that they can remove any possible findings on them or in their vehicle. They wanted to distance the primary piece of evidence away from Springfield in hopes of decreasing discoverability. Believing that this way of getting rid of evidence would prevent suspicion in the case that road checks were carried out, Nicholas, as the murderer, wrote out the order. Later, the couple boarded a bus to Nicholas's home state, where he planned to lay low from the authorities alongside Gypsy. The piece of their hastily mapped-out getaway that played into this was their hasty decision to toss the pills out of their couple more out the car window, which was the one in hindsight that really put them in a bind and ultimately led to their arrest within the next 24 hours. Gypsy had looked healthy and walked on her own, passengers at the bus station said. She thought they had escaped punishment, but their behavior soon caught the attention of police. Worrying Facebook posts made from Dee Dee's account alarmed the family's friends. They attempted to reach out to the Blanchards but got no response, so they called the police. When officers arrived at the scene, they saw Dee Dee's car parked outside the house and quickly ruled out a spontaneous trip. Noticing a lack of movement in the house, they tried to peer inside, but gave up on that and ordered a search warrant instead. As neighbors and family friends waited for permission to enter, anxiety blossomed. After the warrant was issued, police entered the home and found Dee Dee's body in the bedroom, under a blanket. The scene bore blood, but no signs of forced entry or struggle, increasing suspicion. And where was Gypsy and her wheelchair? Local residents felt worried sick for Gypsy's safety, convinced that she lacked the essential medical care she required. But the investigation revealed the reality. Gypsy had never been sick with the ailments her mother said she was. Using information regarding Gypsy's hidden relationship with Nicholas, police tracked the IP address of the Facebook posts to Wisconsin. Nicholas Godjohn had surrendered to authorities without a struggle a few days after the murder during a search of his home, in which authorities executed a search warrant. The trial heard harrowing details about Gypsy's life. The prosecution recounted years of abuse and manipulation by her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard. Gypsy claimed she had killed her as a last resort to free herself from the shackles of the life she was forced to live for years. That Gypsy's illnesses had been invented by her mother to make money and receive emotional support was well documented by the defense using large fragments of her medical records. Nicholas Godjohn, the man who delivered the fatal blows, also testified, saying that he had acted at Gypsy's request. His lawyers argued that he was operating under Gypsy's spell and could not be held fully aware of what he was doing. But the court convicted Nicholas of first-degree murder. In 2019, he was handed a life sentence without parole. Gypsy eventually entered a guilty plea for second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. But Nicholas got a lot of heavier penalties. After serving 85% of her sentence, Gypsy was released on parole in December 2023. Gypsy also found relationships while in prison. She got engaged eventually to a man named Ken Urker after the two were matched through a pen pal program. But the engagement was a short one. In July 2022, she married Ryan Anderson, a teacher from Louisiana. Although there were no visitors to help celebrate, their wedding ceremony in prison symbolized a huge milestone in her new life. It represented Gypsy's own determination to get a fresh start and begin anew. While in prison, Gypsy has engaged in various rehabilitation programs such as courses on personal development and educational projects. She was said to have a positive influence on her fellow inmates and was described as a role model for inmates seeking to change. Gypsy also did well, healthy and no longer subject to the medical abuse she suffered previously. Prison was the first time, she said, when she was able to break free of this control that had governed her entire life. She was a sensible, no-nonsense woman, and she focused on emotional recovery and being prepared for life after incarceration, which is a critical part of time in the correctional facility. When Gypsy was released, she had mixed feelings: joy for long overdue freedom, relief for the end of years' worth of captivity, and fear of an uncertain new life. For the first time in years, she said, she was able to make her own decisions. But she also battled internal conflict as she adjusted to normal life. Her main motivation became using her experience to help other abuse and manipulation victims, and showing that all people deserve a second chance at life. Gypsy has made a point of sharing her story, raising awareness of the dangers of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, and hoping to help other victims of similar abuse. Her story inspired several documentaries and series, including The Act on Hulu. But her new life was one of not just freedom, but heightened public scrutiny. A special reception was hosted in her honor, celebrating her new beginning. Gypsy, flanked by her friend and family members, discussed what she has planned for the future, explained how her rehabilitation has been, and detailed her desire to assist other abuse victims. Her mission, she said, was to tell her story to others who were suffering from manipulation or violence, and to show them that they can find the strength to begin again. The speeches were full of heartfelt gratitude to everyone who had supported her over the years. Gypsy also said she plans to write a memoir and get involved in charity work to help victims of domestic violence. Her journey from defeat to self-acceptance turned reception into a symbol of a new beginning and a testament to her strength, inspiring each guest to find hope and change. A new deepening relationship with her husband, Ryan Anderson, has been a major part of this new chapter. Ryan makes public appearances in support of her and assists her in readjusting to life on the outside. He's both her rock and a muse for her own projects. They are involved in charitable programs for victims of domestic violence and manipulation. Ryan assists Gypsy in constructing a new life with the warmth and support she has not experienced in the past. Their relationship has represented a new beginning of love and trust that ultimately heals the scars of the past. Gypsy has done interviews with major publications to tell her story and is working on a book which will touch on her journey. Her reaction to the public attention and internet memes that followed her release is one of the most discussed topics. While many of the comments have been positive, Gypsy said it was hard to deal with jokes and memes, considering the traumatic circumstances of her life. She said she was thankful for the support, but said her story is years of pain and abuse that shouldn't be forgotten. Gypsy's new focus is spreading awareness about Munchausen syndrome by proxy and bringing attention to this rare form of abuse. She works with organizations that assist victims of domestic violence and advocates for legislative change to ensure that people going through what he went through find support in the justice system. A tragic tale of manipulation, deceit, and the fight for freedom, Gypsy Rose Blanchard's story is unlike any other. She reminds us just how far people can go for attention and control, and the magnificence of the human spirit to survive when the situation seems as bleak as possible. To hear more stories like this, join us by subscribing to our channel